I went to see If, Imaginary Friends, so you don't have to. But why shouldn't you? Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. My name is Paul Mount. This is my review of If, Imaginary Friends, the new film from John Krasinski. This is out today, as I'm recording this. It's Friday afternoon. I went to see it last Sunday at a weekend preview. It seemed to be getting preview screenings last weekend on Saturday and Sunday in the UK. First run for some strange reason. And I think I mentioned in a previous video I intended to get a video up early in the week. Didn't get around to it. Which is possibly as much to do with the film than me just being too lazy to do it. It's an interesting thing with sort of children's films and animated films. When I was a younger lad, I used to love all the TV cartoons, your Wacky Racist, Dick Dastardly, the early Scooby-Doos, all that stuff. They were part of my growing up and my childhood. Animation in films has changed over the years. Of course, Pixar came along, did the Toy Story films, which I really enjoyed. I enjoyed the early Shrek films. I enjoyed the early Ice Age films. Trouble is for me, there's so many animated films flying all over the place, and they're all about anthropomorphic animals and these larger-than-life creatures pulling faces and leaping about, and that just doesn't appeal to me anymore. It's just not my thing. So I went to see Imaginary Friends, knowing that it had some of these creatures in them, but I was intrigued by it, and I went to see it because it's the work of John Krasinski. It's not an easy name to say. And I really loved the A Quiet Place series, as it's now become. I think that's a fantastic horror science fiction sort of hybrid series. Very much looking forward to Day One, which is out shortly. But I went to see it because of him, and I wondered what he would be able to bring to this particular genre of filmmaking. I didn't like the film, but I will make that quite clear from the start. But I could see what he was trying to do. I think he was trying to make a very old-fashioned sort of film, and that's quite commendable that he wanted to leave aside all the noise and clamour of modern animated films and tell a more thoughtful story. But I think the problem in doing that is he's made a film which is just quite dull. And I think it's a film that is trying to appeal to two different audiences, but it pulls them in two different directions. So I think the kids won't find much to engage them here, and I think that adults will not be interested in the stuff that's sort of aimed for kids, that the cutesy animals might be a bit childish, I suppose, for adults. So it's a film it tears itself in two directions, and I think that's its downfall. Also, part of its downfall is there's nothing dramatic happening. The story of the film, basically, it sort of focuses on a 12-year-old girl called Bee, played by Cailie Fleming. Bee is the sort of girl I don't think exists anymore as a 12-year-old girl. She's sort of quite cloying and quite simpering. She dresses quite oddly. I don't know whether this is a conscious choice to make her look old-fashioned, but she's had a tough time. Her mother's passed away fairly recently with cancer. Her father's now in hospital. Her father's played by John Krasinski himself. He's in hospital awaiting heart surgery. So she's living with her grandmother Margaret, played brilliantly by Fiona Shaw, I have to say, in an apartment in New York. She meets up inadvertently with a peculiar, slightly sinister character called Cal, played by Ryan Reynolds. He appears to be custodian of some rather strange animated creatures. One of them is called Bud, I think it is, voiced by Steve Carell, who is probably the liveliest of the animated creatures. And it transpires that Cal looks after forgotten imaginary friends, hence the title If, Imaginary Friends, that kids have had over the years. And when the kids grow up and forget about their imaginary friends, they still exist in this sort of hinterland where they exist and they don't exist. They don't belong to anybody. And Cal tries to match them up with new kids, which is a sweet idea, I suppose. Bee is quite taken by this idea, and she sort of joins up with him to try and complete his task. To one, match up these disenfranchised creatures with new young kids who want friends, who want imaginary friends. And then part of the plot involves them re-evoking memories of these creatures, these imaginary friends, to adults now who are busily dealing with the frantic modern adult world, and they've forgotten all their childish things. That's really it. That's all there is to it. I mean, there's no drama to it. There's no excitement. There's no villain. There's no high stakes. There's no chases, which I suppose is refreshing in this sort of film, but it just makes for a slightly tedious viewing experience. Now, as I mentioned, I think it's a film that'll have trouble attracting the interest of kids, and I think that adults will find it possibly a bit too mawkish. And the evidence I give for this is when I went to see the preview screening last Sunday. Admittedly, there were only 6 people in quite a small screen. There was one family unit, the couple and a young child. And after about 40 minutes, they left, because I suspect the child wasn't engaged enough by the animated creatures, because they weren't doing anything. They weren't jumping about. They weren't leaping around. They were talking, and it was a dialogue, I think, which would probably go above the heads of a lot of young kids. And they left. So it was just me and another sort of elderly couple who were sitting towards the end of the aisle in front of me. And I suspect this is what will happen with the film. I think that adults taking their kids to see this funny film about talking creatures will find it's not that at all. It doesn't have enough to engage kids, because it's not fast moving, it's not colourful and exciting. And I think these sorts of things, you need to have something a bit exciting to have to keep the kids' interest. This constant talk about losing your imaginary friends and growing up and wistfully yearning for innocent days. Kids aren't interested in that. And I think that in this context, I don't think adults will either. I mean, I'm not saying as a blanket thing that adults won't get anything out of this. And I can imagine there are scenes that people might find tear-jerking if you chime with them, if you connect with that sort of thing. If you had an imaginary friend and you think about the early... I think it does do. It does make you think about childhood and how precious it is, and how perhaps we don't cherish it as much as we should in our haste to be adult and have all those adult responsibilities. But it's something and nothing at the end of the day. It falls between two stools. Now, I admire John Krasinski for doing something like this, and in a way I admire the studios for financing a film which doesn't have all those very obvious hooks to hang it on, because it doesn't have the excitement. It doesn't have anything thrilling about it. And the musical choices are interesting as well. I mean, there's a nod in one place to an old Esther Williams dance sequence from the 1920s, 1930s. Some of the music, the background music, you've got Tina Turner and Rod Stewart on the soundtrack. Fiona Shaw's character, Margaret, the grandmother, she is taken back to her youth by some sort of by a bit of classical music. And there are sort of old crooner songs. So there's no rap, thank God for that. There's no thundering rap music in it. But there's nothing that kids can latch onto musically either. The soundtrack, and Michael Giacchino's soundtrack, very much aimed at adults. So I think that this is an adult film wearing children's clothes, but finding that they don't actually fit, so that neither of them are particularly comfortable. I found it quite dull. I must admit, after about an hour, I was so unengaged by what was going on. I genuinely thought about leaving. I thought, well, Thomas, I don't care about these characters. There's nothing happening that I want to know about. There's no end game in sight that I want to sit around and watch. But I very rarely leave films. I hate leaving a film. I think if somebody's gone to the effort of making a film, sit it out. I mean, if I could sit through Hereditary, as banal as that got in this last half an hour, I could certainly sit through this. But I'm not saying it's not a good film. I think it's very well made. The animation is excellent. The voice talent, I must mention the voice talent. Steve Carell is there. Phoebe Waller-Bridge is there. George Clooney, Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, Sam Rockwell, Lou Gossett Jr. I mean, it's a who's who of sort of Hollywood A-listers providing voices here. Emily Blunt is there, John Krasinski's wife. But you can't really tell many of them. I mean, Phoebe Waller-Bridge's voice is quite distinctive. Steve Carell's voice obviously is quite distinctive. And his character, Bub, he's the only one that has any sort of real personality that you sort of smile at now and again. But the rest are just underdeveloped sort of funny shapes and animals, and attempts are made to try to make them funny. But maybe it's me not used to this sort of film, but it just didn't work. So I'll be interested to hear if any of you guys out there go to see this film, what you thought of it, and if you take something away from it. I am very conscious of the fact that this is not in my wheelhouse of the sort of film I would normally watch, so maybe I'm missing some magic element that it had that makes it work, but it just didn't work for me. And as I've said, I think the main problem is it's sort of zigzagging back and forth, trying to appeal to kids 1 minute and then making poignant points about life and growing up in the next. And I think that's what I can only say from the evidence when I went to see it, the family with the young kid who left after about 40 minutes because presumably the kid was bored. And I think if, as I said, if you're planning to take kids to see this expecting a big Toy Story type romp with lots of action and drama, you're not going to get that. You're going to get quite a dull film, I'm afraid. And because of that, I'm going to give if Imaginary Friends, I'm going to give it 3 out of 10, I'm afraid. I've thought about 4, but I think it's very much a 3 for me. It's, I don't know if it's disappointing because I don't know what I expected because it's not my sort of film. But I think even on those sort of expectations, it just falls flat, unfortunately. So that's If Imaginary Friends is in your cinemas now. If you want to go and see it, why not? If you do, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you thought, because I would be genuinely interested to see if there's maybe something here I've missed, and if it does have an appeal that's completely eluded me. Right, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, why not like and subscribe? Leave a comment down below. I'll see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.